Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Make the Game. This is Craz.
This is Smid.
This is Luni.
This is Ben.
This is Orca.
And today we are moving on to the second segment that we were going to talk about, the player. Now, this is one of the most integral roles, or important roles, I should be saying. I guess it's like the same thing. I don't know. Am I using that word right?
Maybe.
No,
Probably
let's
the
just
most
go with
important role,
Yeah,
I
this
would
is,
say.
this is the most role or thing that we really need to decide on, because this is you. This is the person. This is your simulation, your immersive experience. This needs to be damn near perfect to what the core of the game has to be, or the game is just straight up gonna fall apart. And seeing as the whole idea is it kind of be an immersive first person, is kind of placing you as the player behind the keyboard, or the controller, should this actually be a console game, into the eyes and the eyes, body, everything of this person surviving this desolate zombie infested metropolis. Now, when we first were going about this, we were throwing out a bunch of ideas. So this is actually probably one of the we didn't really butt heads, but this is where we have a lot of disagreements in terms of how we should go about this, rather than us just kind of building upon ideas. And it came out to a lot of interesting concepts and stuff like that. If I recall, the two major ideas that we had was one of them kind of being a class-based or semi-class-based, where you start off as a certain person in a certain field, such as a doctor, a police officer, construction worker, etc., or you're just starting off as a person and you build up from that point. And we're gonna of course we're gonna flesh out on this, and we're gonna expand upon. We're gonna probably butt heads a little bit more on some of these ideas, but we're gonna try to solidify like one thing that we can kind of agree on, or maybe we won't. We'll see where this goes in the next however long this episode actually takes. So does anybody have any ideas over the past week that they thought about that they want to kind of put out on the table?
Well, I mean... Oh, you go ahead, Ben.
No. By all means, I need a minute to actually, order my thoughts here.
Oh, cool. All right. So, for me, I think, because in the first episode, we kind of just established the general theme that, this is a kind of a randomized world each time. Each time you play this game, the city is kind of your own instance of that city, so it's different each time. So I think going with that, obviously you're going to create a character. I don't think that you're going to choose from established characters already. I think it would probably fit better, if you created this person, what they look like and everything. And for me personally, I think you should have a background before, because I think in zombie lore, zombie literature, zombie stories, it's kind of the theme of the before and the after. There was a before world, and now zombies everywhere. So that said, every person has a history before this started. So I think if you establish that beforehand, you choose your character's backstory before you start, I think that would be cool. Or maybe even a concept where you have to discover your character's your character's past. He has a past, but the player doesn't know it until he goes through the game.
I sort of like that second idea of you don't really discover who you are until you go through the game. Although I'm sort of wondering how that would sort of work out, because the idea that everyone starts with amnesia I think would be a little bit lame. But I also think it would be a good way to get around, okay, you create your character at the very beginning. Well, you have these certain different professions that you were in the world before. I can sort of see everyone wanting to be the National Guard reservist, the cop, the doctor, or the car mechanic on the long shot that they can fix up a pickup and get the hell out of the city. So I think that second idea of you don't really know who you are until you figure it out over the course of gameplay would sort of eliminate that, slotting into everyone wanting to be 3 or 4 of whatever myriad of professions we decide to put in there.
Well,
I still like the idea of having, 20 or 30 sort of castes or general occupations that players are randomly assigned to, going with the theme that you don't get to decide who you are or where you are when the zombie apocalypse hits. So you have to work you have to work with what you have. You have to work with who you have. You could be a construction worker or an auto mechanic or a National Guardsman or a nurse or a student. You could be anything because you can't predict this kind of thing.
Yeah.
I agree
And
with
everybody
Looney
gets thrown in.
I agree with Looney that a more randomized approach, but that could not be a static thing. That could be an option that's turned on or off, whether you get randomly assigned a class or you actually start as what you want.
I think you should still be able to at least customize your appearance, though, because that kind of
Yeah.
seems to be the
Okay.
standard these days.
Well, first off, there shouldn't be any appearance customization because this is like a strict first-person game. What's the point of spending all this time looking at your face when you're not actually going to look at your face?
That does raise a pretty valid point.
Like, I mean, the only time
Yeah,
you'll really
I
be
was
seeing is if
thinking
you look down into a
multiplayer.
puddle. Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter much for multiplayer. It could just be a generic body because, I mean, in all honesty, if I mean, we're jumping far ahead in terms of the development structure of that. But in multiplayer, if I see another person, I'm going to be like, thank God, I don't give a fuck if this guy looks like Rob Zombie or Lady Gaga on a bad day. Let's just, thank God, we got two people to deal with shit now. It's more
Well-
about the gameplay more so than the person, spending 3 hours making their character look awesome.
Yeah.
Not only that, but like keeping on multiplayer for a second, games like Gary's Mod, they're roleplay servers. There are like 7 or 8 like standard body models, and people seem to get along fine with just those to choose from. So I don't think necessarily appearance customization in single player or multiplayer is sort of a big need. And for all we know, whoever decides to make this game will be doing it on some sort of Space Station 13 or roguelike sort of system, in which all you're going to see of the top of your character is the like top of your character's head and his shoulders as he's walking around.
That would definitely defeat the purpose of spending time in a Skyrim level character generator.
Yeah.
If I could go back just a little bit, because I just had an idea about the discovering aspect that I kind of just threw out there. Because I remember Brendan mentioned an amnesia type thing, and I didn't really consider that, but yeah, that would be silly. But I think what would be interesting is, say, for example, you start out and it does not specifically say what your profession is, but say you start out and the two things that it shows you on your portable map, like say you start out and you only get a portable map and like an item with you. And this portable map would show just 2 markings, your profession and your house. So you
like
start
home,
out and
or just like a hand-drawn notebook paper or a piece of notebook paper that just says like home and work on it.
right. So
Yeah.
that would kind of give you some direction to like where you should go right when you start. And then obviously it would branch out from there. But what would be interesting is you start out as this character and you don't know who they are or what profession they are, but you kind of discover as you start playing like your character is better at certain things than a previous character you've played. And by the time like you go to your house or your profession, you discover like, wow, okay, my character's a mechanic. That makes sense now.
Well, doesn't that neglect basic self-awareness, though?
Well, not necessarily, because the player and the character can be 2 different things. I mean, technically, yes, like you are the player. I mean, you are the character, but you don't know what this person's background is until the game tells you that person's background.
That's true.
Well,
That's
that
true.
would kind of be like playing the part of if you told an actor to play someone without giving him his lines. That's a terrible example.
I actually think it would probably be more like if you told an actor to play a character and he knew the lines, but he didn't know what the motivation was. Is
He didn't know
probably
the
a better analogy.
accents, or he didn't know the background of the character, because having gone through a few film classes, like when you're writing a script for the characters and stuff like that, you're not only just fleshing out like a basic background, you're fleshing out things that happen in their life that people will never see in the movie sometimes, just
Yeah.
to help build up what the character's like.
Well,
I'm
let's
just-
take a step back here for a moment. Why does the character need to have a story, like a backstory and motivations and all these things? The game is about survival.
That
It
is what I
doesn't
was.
matter what happened at your 5th birthday party when you were, 5 years old. You stepped on a bee and it stung you on the foot. That doesn't fucking matter. You're trying to survive in a zombie apocalypse. What you
This is
did last
true.
week, what you did an hour ago means nothing. You're surviving in a zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, it's kind
This
of all
is
about
true.
the present
You
and the
can
future.
You can sort of think about this sort of situation you're thrown into sort of has an equalizing effect on, the vast majority of people.
Yeah.
Whether or not you were, or you're like an ex-president or like a congressman, or you're a homeless guy, or you're like a reservist who just got back from his 3rd tour in Iraq. When the zombie apocalypse happened, you're all sort of equally screwed.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, but like that's kind of what I mean though, like because if you think about the way the story starts, you start out and you just wake up and zombie apocalypse has happened. You're not gonna just like internally monologue like, oh, this is what I was doing or whatever. You're gonna pull out a map. You're gonna be like, I need to go home and check out get some things there, or
Well,
I need to go to work and get some things there.
I think
So-
the idea that we kind of initially had the very first time we talked about this was that the game, from your perspective, would start, 2 or 3 weeks into the actual outbreak after, the chaos has happened. Basically, you've been hiding in your house the entire time, and now you are forced to leave because you are completely out of
Supplies.
supplies, food, whatever.
And it's not. Well, it couldn't even just be your home. It could be wherever you were hiding.
Yeah.
You're going down. You're walking down the road, coming out of a Radio Shack, and all of a sudden the zombie apocalypse hit, and you just jump into the nearest building, and you barricade yourself on the 3rd floor.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And then instead of changing it to you wake up.
Yeah.
I guess what I mean is like, I would think if you had a handheld map, the two things you would be able to mark just without a doubt is where you work and where you live.
And where you live, yeah.
Mhm. Oh, definitely. And I can understand that, but I like the idea of having some type of static. All right, I know where my house is, and from there I can find the things of my normal life, and I know where my work is because that's where I go every day.
Uh-huh.
I don't like the whole thing of like where we were talking. I don't know if I'm misunderstanding what Orca was saying, but like discovering what the player does and stuff like that. It almost makes it seem like there's more of a story to it than we are really kind of talking about.
No. I think he meant discovering in the sense that, okay, you start as a character. You don't have any way of picking your profession at all. Like you hit the player creates scene or screen. You put in a name and you hit the go button. There's no pick, before the outbreak you were a doctor or a cop or a pharmacist or whatever. You just start and you have a map that says home and work, and you discover who you are by, progressing through the game. You discover that whatever character you're playing has some sort of weighted stat in small arms or scavenging or mechanics, or you build sort of your character's backstory on a random weighted stat when you start the game, but there is no sort of class system or profession system per se. I think that was more what he meant by discovering who you are.
Yeah, what I meant by it is it's a very, very limited backstory. Because your backstory really wouldn't come up as a topic at any point unless you were sitting around with people and you were talking about it. But that could be a topic for another time, like how you want to do narrative in this whole thing. But
I don't. Oh yeah, that's another time.
But what I meant is like you start out and you're better at certain things than
I understand
a character
and
you played before, and your profession location is different every time. So
I'm assuming and I'm assuming that there's no actual like HUD indicators saying that your firearm skill or anything like that goes up. Everything has to be you could go through the entire game and not know without
Right,
like if you say you didn't go to your work because oh my god there's a giant horde surrounding the entire building, so fuck that.
Yeah.
You could go the entire game without knowing really what your profession is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, now here's speaking of stats and whatnot. How are we thinking of handling, like, I assume as you do things in the game, you'll increase your stats in certain areas, like firearms proficiency, medical proficiency, things like that, so that you can actually improve them and get better at, breaking down doors or, picking locks or scavenging for food or whatever. How are we thinking about handling that?
Well, okay, just to make sure. So, are we all sort of on board the idea of not really picking like your profession or anything like you did in past life? Just have it like a random weighted stat when you start the game, just so we can sort of put this to rest.
I like that idea, though I would like to kind of throw in possibly as like an option that you can click off to say, oh, I can pick all these bunch of different things. But I mean, we're really aiming for a niche market, so there might be people that pick up and go, oh, I only want to play a National Guardsman, I only want to play a doctor, and that would be the way that we do it. While it's really really great for our ideas, if somebody wants to play this game but play through it as a doctor, we should at least give them the opportunity to quote unquote cheat and pick it.
Not to mention, if it's completely random every time, you may hit the go button 8 times and get the doctor 8 times and never know what it's like to play any of the other classes.
Sure.
But I was asking about stats because I was thinking, what if you have your randomizer button, but if you don't want to go random, what if instead there was, and I'm manufacturing this as I go, so you're going to have to bear with me.
Yep.
Like the special stats in a Fallout game. You pick how much you want in strength, you pick how much you want in perception, stuff like that. But what if there were stats like that for firearms, fixing trucks, fixing like vehicles and things, fixing radios, whatever. There's one for like electronics, I guess would be for radios, medical proficiency, stuff like this. And you get, maybe there's like 20 possible points to heal in each one of these. And when you start the game, you get a pool of 10 points that you can spend on each of these skills. But what this does is, say you put 4 points in medical proficiency, 2 points in weapons, and a couple other points in other things, so that the majority of your points are in weapons and weapons and medical knowledge. Well, what if this decides what you spawn as? So if you have a lot of points in medic and no points in firearm, you might be a doctor. If you have a couple of points in, maybe half of your points in medic and some of your points in just other generic things, you might spawn as a nurse who would have less medical knowledge. If you put all of your points into medic and firearms, you might be like a National
Army
Guard medic.
triage. Yeah.
So pretty much you're saying you pick the points and then based upon the points it picks the role.
Exactly.
Well, that's
so
still
if you put
picking
all
your
your points
role.
into repair, then you spawn as like a mechanic.
Well, I mean,
that still ends up with everybody puts points in guns and repair and medical.
Well, we can. All right. The main issue that we keep coming up on.
Stats important enough that you have to have something in them.
Exactly. The main thing, like the main issue that Ben said and Luni said is that people are always going to want to go for guns and always going to want to go for this or that. But like as one of the ideas that we spoke about that this isn't exactly for this episode, but to kind of throw this out there, if you get bitten and we talked about this a bit and we're going to argue about it a little bit in another episode, but if you get bitten and then you don't have an opportunity to go and to find some type of first stage cure or anything like that, you're about to have a day and a half until it's game over or whatever the number is. So combat is scary. ammunition might be scarce. If you want to go and take and put all your points in the firearms, and then all of a sudden you can't find. I mean, you may be able to find a 9mm pistol, but only find like 30-06 ammo. What is going to happen? Like it's you want to put all the points are there, but if you want to try to stack one stat, you are gambling super hard on finding exactly what you need. And if you
Yeah.
don't get that, you are in for a really rough playthrough.
My concern is that if you let people pick their characters, and that kind of loses a lot of the aspect of you don't get to decide who you are or where you are when the apocalypse hits.
Yeah.
Well,
the randomizer is still there, which if the randomizer would do is say, okay, well, this person is now randomly inserted into the position of mechanic. So most of his points are in repair. He maybe has like basic first aid knowledge.
Oh, so what you're saying is like
about firearms.
So what you're saying is give them
there, but this is for when you turn the randomizer off for people who just
Oh,
play.
okay. I
I
thought you were talking about the game in general.
No.
My
We're
bad.
talking about like a secondary option.
With a point system like this, you could do anything with it. You could have a randomizer. You could have a class picker. You could have just put points wherever you want, and that's what it makes you. You could do it any way, as long as, I mean, with a point system like that, it's a piece of cake.
Yeah.
I'm all for giving players more choice. So
I
exactly.
sort of think that idea of, here is the point system breakdown, and then I think, come up with 10 or something like that later in this episode or in another episode. So say you start with 10 points to spend across all of them, and then 1 would be sort of like a working knowledge of just about anything. So if you have like a 1 in medic, you can, bandage yourself up or wrap a cut wound in gauze or disinfect it or whatever. And 0 is sort of like,
You're winging it,
yeah, you're making shit up as you go.
and it might work, it might not.
But we're devolving a bit into minutia.
Yeah.
But I think that idea of the stat system, and then you can pick a class, or you can just have the computer randomize it and go. I think that's probably about the best compromise of what sort of each of us has differing ideas of what we want to see.
And just to addendum this on for the developers who might be listening, what I'm really thinking to fully flesh it out is, say there's a guns class, a medic class, a repair class. There's maybe like 3 different professions in each class. Like guns might be like a National Guard or like a cop, a National Guardsman, and I don't know, a SWAT guy or something. And as you divvy out points, if you take 1 point out, it might drop you into cop. But you put 1 point in the nurse, or in medic, it might bump you into a nurse because you got more points than that. That way, people can drop 1 point here and get 1 point there to change their class, and then just fiddle around with the points until they find the class that they like that has the perfect balance of everything.
Yeah, and for people who only care about the stats, the class is going to be a secondary because it's something that's assigned after you've put your points in. So. Yeah.
It's flavor text.
So if you absolutely want to be a nurse, you could put enough points in there to get your nurse class, and then just spend the rest of your points who knows where, in whatever the hell you want. And
here's a question.
Nurse.
Here's a question about the stats overall, right? Now, do we just want to have a flat, like, say, just like, for Fallout, 1 to 10 base for everything, or the quote-unquote stat that you start with kind of has, like, a higher value because you've already started more, so you can be more proficient since you've had training?
Like tag
So
skills?
Tag skills.
Well,
No,
not like tag skills, because tag skills bumps up the starting or bumps up your points from within, but everything is still on an equal 1 to 100 scale. I'm talking about, say everything has a max out of 10, and you start off with firearms at, say, you start off with firearms and you can go to a max of 15, or it could be to 11, or something higher.
I sort of prefer this idea. And that is that you can go from 0 to 10, and you can only say by the end of the game, you can only get 1 skill to 10. You'll have enough points to spread around in your other stuff, but you'll only ever be able to get 1 skill to 10.
Okay.
and that will be your ultimate specialization. Because I don't like that idea of going over 100% just because you started as one thing or another. Because someone can be a National Guard reservist, but have a really good talent, have a really good talent for like fixing cars or something. So they shouldn't be arbitrarily locked in and to only being able to go like to the max and over in the gun skill because of X.
Okay, then coming up with that, how do we allow the player to pick that skill?
Maybe bonus points for whatever their tag
For
skill
when you,
is.
okay.
Like
How
bonus,
about,
like you gain points in that faster.
well, let's think of it like a D&D character creator. Like you create you roll out your character, and I'm not imagining us having like strength or dexterity. I'm imagining these sort of like guns, medical, scavenging, whatever. Those are your only stats in this game. And then you pick or you input your initial 10 into all of these skills. And let's say when you first create a character, you can go no higher than, I don't know, 3 or 4 in one skill. And then as you progress through the game, you'll pick up a skill or two here, and you can spread them out as you choose. And then there will be, let's say, level 10. And level 10 unlocks that, here is the first chance you get to unlock maximum rank in one skill. So if you started with, a skill, or, say you level up guns every time you get a point. At level 10, you can max that out. You have your max level skill. You're done. You can start spreading into other places. And whether it's whether it's random or not, you can still spend skills where you choose when you level up.
So, this, I guess this comes into a very important thing that we need to address here. Do we want to go with a overall character level up, or do we want to go with upon using things and practicing things, we level up the skill?
I don't
Second
think it
one.
should be a level system. I think it should just be skills, because levels are just too arbitrary. I mean, you think about real life, nobody can say that, like, I'm a level 5 paramedic. You're gauged on just your job experience, which is down to
I
your
suppose,
skills.
but I don't know. I'm trying to come up with some sort of working idea that we can build upon here.
I've actually been thinking about this, if you'll allow me a moment.
Go ahead.
Go for it.
What I was thinking is, okay, say you want to level up your medic skill.
Uh-huh.
You start out with a really crappy medic skill and you want to level it up. Well, in most RPGs, somebody would say, okay, well, I want to get to level 1 medic. Well, that means I have to heal like 50 broken bones. And then I level up in medic. And then the level after that, I have to heal 100 broken bones. Well, here's the problem. If you want to level up medic, the only way you can do that is by healing things. If you're playing this by yourself and the goal is to not get bitten or hurt, you're never going to level up medic. If you can never find ammo, you're never going to level up guns. So what you want and what you get aren't exactly going to be the same thing. So having it be like, oh, I have to heal 50 broken bones, but that means I have to break my leg in order to even do that. I have to break my leg 50 times. People are just going to be jumping off of balconies to break their leg 50 times to level up their medic skill. That's not going to work. What I was thinking instead is like you have to heal a certain amount of like injuries or something, but it's like a quality thing as well. Like, say you've got your firearms at 5, you want to get it to 6. Well, that means you have to do a certain amount of damage with firearms. Well, if you shoot a zombie in the chest with 100 rounds, you're not really getting better at firearms. You're wasting ammo, and you're a shitty shot. So, have it be a quality thing. If you hit them in the head and kill them with 1 bullet, then you get 1 extra, 1/100th of a point into, 1/100th of the way to your next point in firearms or something like that. Instead of just like, if you kill 100 zombies with guns, then you level up.
Well, as you're saying that, I kind of came up with an idea, right?
Okay,
we can come up with like you were talking about doctor, they would have to break their bones. What if it's something along the lines of you take a zombie and then you start dissecting the zombie to take a look at the internals. Something along those lines. Like you come up with some sort of working within a zombie metropolis thing that you can do to help level up your skill. Electricians could be just stripping wire to try to make just crafting more wire, et cetera, et cetera.
It's an interesting idea that I'm wondering how that would work in a gameplay mechanic sort of sense, though.
Now, I think like you could do it so that it's the same mechanic as if you were healing yourself. I mean, if you treat every body the same, then technically you could just go up to a dead zombie or any dead body. Maybe it's just a dead body that isn't a zombie. And, practice your medical skills on it. And the thing is about, like, just, jumping off ledges to break your bones to keep practicing your healing, I don't think players would... players could do that if they had enough, supplies to do that, but I would imagine that if you had to, heal a broken bone, it would require a lot of supplies to do that.
Yeah, and especially if you're doing a very detailed injuries model, which sounds like the kind of thing for this game, you break your leg, you're not running for another month.
Yeah, pretty much.
If you may find yourself in a situation with zombies where you did something retarded to try to do the stats over. You did something stupid just to get your stats up, and you just screwed yourself over. You're dead, and your game's over.
There's certain things that you would be able to improve, like certain skills you would be able to improve over others. Like, as someone, say for example, like if you go back to like the first idea where you start as someone random, you don't know who you are. You start out as like a surgeon who specializes in like broken bones or something like that. So you're like what Luni said, realistically, if you break your leg, you aren't going to be running for a long time, but that bone surgeon would better heal that wound than someone who didn't know how to do it with the same resources. But that's not something that like you're going to be able to practice your skill on, because you're only going to be able to like do it maybe once or twice with the type of resources that you have. So all it really means is that, oh, I spawned as a doctor who knows how to do this. That means like when I patch my leg up, instead of being like 30% slower, I'm only 50% slower because it's a better patched wound.
You mean more like 20% slower, but
oh yeah, whatever.
that would be an interesting way to go about that.
The doctor's worse at his job than other people, but like what Smid said, like you can reasonably like expect that if you shoot well, you're gonna get better at shooting. That's something. Like if you run a lot, you're gonna get better at running.
Here's a sorry to cut you off for a moment, but here's an idea that I just had that is out there. And I would like to elicit a crowd response with this one and see what the viewers have to think about it once this episode's over and they've actually listened to it. But maybe the stats system should not be based on how good you are at something, but how many supplies you have with something. I mean, we're talking about a game where the goal is survival and scavenging. Well, a brain surgeon can't do brain surgery without the equipment to do brain surgery. He can't do it with a scalpel and a bandage. It's not going to work. And likewise, a guy carrying a minigun can't obliterate 1 million zombies without ammo and special equipment and all sorts of things. So maybe a system where you level up based on how much of something you've collected, as opposed to how good you are at, jumping off a ledge and healing your own leg. So if you have, a whole mess of like tons of medical supplies, you raided like 50 drugstores, and you have a metric ton of medical supplies back at your apartment, you can heal yourself really fast, and it works really well, and you make better patches, for bites and whatnot, or whatever. And
I actually
likewise, if you've raided 5 National Guard armories and you have 800 billion bullets at home, then you're going to be better at shooting zombies
Well,
because you have more
I-
more of what you need.
Well,
The-
I
what I
actually
don't-
really like this idea because the whole sort of idea we started out with this is that your survival is almost entirely dependent on what is around you and what you can find. And this sort of idea seems like an actually pretty natural extension of that initial like concept.
I think you should still have to familiarize yourself with the equipment, though, to some extent. I mean, you have what items you have available to you, but you still have your skill with using those items. Like,
Right.
I'm sure I could pick up a scalpel and just start stabbing people with it, because that's pretty intuitive. But anything more complicated than that, at like actually doing surgery.
All right, but
You can mix the two.
well,
Yeah,
here-
combination
I
of
like
both.
the idea, but the issue I'm having with is pretty much with the firearms and combat abilities. Because just because you have a lot of knives doesn't mean you know how to use the knives. Just means you
Yeah,
have
that's true.
you have more opportunities to use the knife.
Well, a
Same
combination
thing with
of
bullets.
both then. A combination. Your proficiency with, say, firearms is dependent on your ability to scavenge ammo. If you happen to find a bunch of ammo combined with the using of the ammo, that makes your
Well,
skill go
Well,
up.
we could. Maybe if we just strip off the first part of that and go back to the original idea with the combat system, we can have combat skills, non-combat skills level up on 2 different planes.
Okay.
It goes to show that will allow you to even more customize the way that you want to play, because it makes sense. If you use a knife or use a gun more, you're going to get more proficient because you're getting used to the recoil, you're getting used to the loudness of the gun, to firing it, to adjusting to the recoil, to aiming. But at the same time, you can't. But if you go over to being an electrician, you're not going to get a better electrician by just failing all the time. You need to kind of make sure that you have the supplies to continually practice.
So what you're saying is that there's a difference between skills that you between how to phrase this. There's a difference between book knowledge and experience. Like
Essentially, yes.
physics is a lot of theory. There, like, you can't do physics unless you have certain calculations. You can't just like get better at doing physics problems by just drooling on a page with a pencil. You have to know stuff. But like knowing how to fight, you learn to fight by fighting a lot.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You can't learn to. You cannot learn to become an expert marksman by sitting down and reading a book, but you can learn to become a pretty proficient electrician by sitting down and reading an electrical, manual for something.
And that's true in real life. If you study up on something like something that doesn't require you to like adapt immediately to the way that the surroundings are, aka a fight or gun shooting or this or that. Like if you're working with like a small radio and you read, all right, this is how you repair a radio. 101 dummies, this is how you repair a radio. You can go through step by step and get it done on the first try because you're following instruction on it. But if you're firing a gun for the first time, you have and you've never done it before, you've only ever seen it in video games or on TV, you have no idea what that first shot is going to be like. So when it hits you, it's going to be completely surprised.
So
if I could
divide
try to
skills into
Yeah,
experiential
Justin
skills.
is sort of trying to talk here, and
Oh,
cool. If I could try to like synthesize like a few ideas that have been kind of floating around. So basically, like what Smid said, like if you have the resources around you, that's what's going to determine what you're good at. But if you go back to the earlier idea, what you spawn as, and say you might know, you might not know, depending on which path you choose, whether you want to choose your stats or whether it's chosen for you. Someone who spawns as an electrician, or actually a better example is a doctor. Like we said earlier, you're going to be able to. What's going to be on your map is your house and your work. The doctor, I would think, has more access to medical equipment than someone who spawns as an electrician, because the two places you're going to know about are your house and your work. So if you go to your work, you're going to probably find medical supplies. and that may or may not happen depending on even if you go there. But the thing is like like I said earlier, certain things you're going to be able to level up, and certain things you won't. Like, you can't just learn how to be a surgeon. That's something that you need to go through a lot of education for. So someone who spawns as a surgeon will be able to better, patch wounds.
And they'll probably have knowledge that other people will never gain.
Right. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to look specifically at every single stat, whether it's firearms usage or whether it's physical activity, whether it's medical equipment, whether it's engineering, and you're going to have to rate them on, are these things that you could learn fairly quickly through experience, or are these things that you're going to have prior experience for?
Okay, so I think this is actually a good time for us to actually touch on the stats that the player are going to have, because this seems like we're at the point where we need to kind of define what is out there for us to really be able to work with, so we can kind of push forward on the player idea.
And what is common knowledge, you mean?
Well, just in general.
No.
Just like the general stats, like, all right, what stats are we using in the pool of things that you can give stuff to? And it, like, if we want to go so far as to be like, do we want substats to it, like, firearms, small arms, rifle arms, etc., etc.
I think just a general guns skill is probably the best idea, because if you break it down too much, you run the risk of getting too complex, or overly sort of complex.
Well, I don't think. We're agreeing that we definitely have to have guns. That's the first thing. We probably should be. We gotta make sure we write this down. This is a very, very important thing to write down. But I think
I agree with Ben that you probably shouldn't separate the firearms category into one category.
I think there should be two. I think that you should have.
The thing is you're gonna, if you want to specialize. If you want to put points in guns, you can put points in guns. But now you're telling someone who wants to use guns that they have to spend double the skill points in guns to get to a decent level with any kind of gun. If they want to specialize in pistols, but they can only find ammo for rifles, then they have to spend points that they could be putting in something else in two different classes for guns. And plus, I can't think of any other class that would need to be separated into subclasses. There's not two different types of medical knowledge. There's medical knowledge, and that's it. So that wouldn't need to be separated. Engineering, like repairing stuff, wouldn't need to be separated. Firearms would be the only one, and then it looks like you're trying to specialize the game on gun count.
Well, I think stuff like, to some extent you can. For example, in medical knowledge, there's first aid, there's surgery, there's pharmacology, which is a big one.
But which of these skills are you going to need in a post-apocalyptic
zombie? You sort of have to sit back and ask yourself, is that really like a necessary thing?
How many times are you going to perform surgery in this game? Especially in the single-player part.
Yeah, for the most part, you're going to do it on yourself.
The point is to not get bitten. It's to not break your leg.
That's true.
So how many times are you going to perform surgery?
I can see where you're going with this, and to a big extent, I agree. When I just think of, all right, firearms, using a handheld weapon is like such on a different level than using a rifle. That it makes sense to split it, but I can understand why, because it seemed like the way that we're making this sound, that points are going to be really hard to come by, and having to drop 1 point in firearms and in rifle would be rough.
You could maybe split it without the player knowing, like have it in behind the scenes kind of thing. So say for example you're learning how, like, you're using firearms a lot in this game, so you have a lot of firearms on you. Say for example, like, you are using a lot of handguns, and you're getting better at it. So in the background of the game, like, say for example you're using handguns. Mm-hmm. As you use it, like, say for example you level up. So in handguns, it goes up by 2 points, and all other guns, it goes up by 1. a scaled model
Okay.
kind of thing.
Yeah,
But
yes.
without the player having to choose and have all this complex UI for it.
So and
The problem I see with this is I think we're getting a little hyperbolic here in that picking up, or a person who's a pretty good shot with a pistol is not going to pick up a rifle and have no idea what the fuck he's doing. If you're an experienced marksman with rifles or with pistols, there's enough knowledge that transfers between the two that there might be a bit of a learning curve when you first pick up one or the other if you're used to or its opposite, but it's not such a gulf of knowledge that if you're good with pistols, you're not going to know how to shoot a rifle.
which is
And
why
It's not
think
like you're
by
going from pistols to Stinger missile launchers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think by splitting it, you're sort of setting up this idea that knowledge does not transfer from one area to the other, even though there's X number of things that are completely in common between the two.
Well, that's what I meant. That's what I meant that if you're using guns a lot and you level up in guns, all of your guns level up. It's just the one that you're using levels up slightly more.
Yeah. I see what he's doing, and actually, I really, really like this idea of if you're using rifles, you may go up to, you may level up and get a point in rifles, but you also get like point 0.3, point 0.4 in pistols as well. You don't get as much, but you're getting some experience from just overall gun usage. And I think that's a really, really good way to go about doing it, personally.
Actually, yeah, I think that's a pretty good compromise unless someone else wants to weigh in.
I'm good.
I'm good.
So, write that down. Mark that. Check mark.
Okay.
I guess you'd have to build up an actual list of skills before you could really decide what groups and clusters
Well, we can
you
do a whole
have.
podcast on skills.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean,
I think let's do the skills thing the next podcast, but let's continue to focus on the player, although I think we may have sort of gotten off topic about the player
I
here.
think
Like
we did.
45 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Well, no, we didn't really, because everything that we're talking about really is essential to the actual player.
If you think of items of information that are stuck to your player character, skills is one of them. Just
Yeah.
as it
Yeah.
is with.
Especially with stats. Stats is super, super mondo important for
Yeah.
the actual
And
player.
considering
Honestly,
how
what else do we
stats.
talk about? What the guy wears? He wears a trench coat. Done.
Well, yeah, but there are sort of things like, where are you going to start in the world? What are you going to have available to you? I mean, these are sort of things that also fall into who you are as the player that we haven't really touched on in I don't think, enough depth yet.
Well, I think we'd have to do a whole podcast on the caste system in order to, or not caste, but the class system in order to flesh out what you spawn, where you spawn, and what you spawn with.
Well, no, because in some sense, I don't think, if the zombie apocalypse happens and you dive into whatever building, if it's your home or it's like the second story or floor of a Radio Shack or something, where you happen to be doesn't necessarily have to affect or be affected by your class. In some senses, I don't think it should at all.
Just think of it like this, right? For the most part, when the zombie apocalypse happen, you either could, you could either be at work, which is unlikely. We're gonna say the thing happened on a Sunday. Nobody's at work. They're all walking out on the city. What do you have on you on a normal city day? You got your wallet, you got your cell phone, maybe an iPod with you. You might have some other things in the wallet. You might, et cetera, et cetera. You're not gonna have a lot of specialized things with you.
Yeah.
It just occurred to me that that's another just going slightly off topic for a moment. That's another reason why it would be a decent idea to start the game like a week after the zombie apocalypse hits, because then your
That's
cell
the plan.
phone's going to be dead.
Yeah.
I think you could just keep it simple. Like, where you start is random, because where people are when the zombie apocalypse hits, you're not going to know. And that's kind of
Yeah.
the theme that we're going with anyway.
If I
But-
can, well, sorry, go ahead.
So you could very well start at work. You could very well start at home. You could very well start somewhere else, like somewhere else where you were in the city, like when it happened.
Yeah, you happen
and they
to be
don't-
going to a movie that day or something, so you start
Right.
in like the projection room or whatever.
Yeah, and I think the only items that they have to give you at the start, I think a cell phone, because pretty much everyone has a cell phone, everyone has a wallet, and the map that shows you where your house and where your work is. Other than that, like what you start out with could be random, and it also could be, you could, if you had smart enough programmers and smart enough people working on this, you could even go into as much detail as to, randomize it to the point of like, say for example it chooses that you are a cop and you are at work, so then you would spawn with a pistol.
Yep.
Things like that where you start to get into nitty gritty type. If this, then this, then this type.
Or if
a
you're
whole bunch
like
of
a wealthy
statements.
family, you spawn at like the opera house with theater glasses and a Batman cape.
That would be
So-
the best starting ever, by the
Exactly.
way.
Here just a proposal to add on to that. Make it's not strictly defined by your class or profession where you spawn, but that will determine the general areas in which you spawn. Like if you're a surgeon, you're not going to spawn in the slums.
You might.
Well,
You don't know. You could be walking. You could be having a jog through the slums. Like
You could have been
there's.
buying meth.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
yeah. Well, like you could have been driving through a bad neighborhood, it happened, your car stalled out, whatever. There are so many circumstances, and I don't want this entire game to be tied to a class system
Yeah.
because it defeats the idea that you don't get to choose who or where you are when the zombie apocalypse happens.
Base it on chance. So
Yeah.
you could make it like 15% chance you spawn at work because people spend a lot of time at work.
Hmm.
Another like 10 to 15% that you spawn at home because people spend a lot of time at home, but it could very well be somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean,
could-
for all you know, the zombie apocalypse hits. You're an on-call nurse, but you're at the police station because you're filing a report because someone broke into your apartment.
Never mind
You know-
that this could all change on the day. Like, if you
Yeah.
Monday through Friday you have a X amount of chance to do this, but on the weekends you don't. But maybe you're working third shift over on the weekends, so I mean, you could throw out like probably 30 different arrays of just how the first set starts, and then push the arrays forward from there, and it could be thousands of combinations.
Yeah,
Wow, I would hate to be that programmer.
yeah.
I would-
Whoever gets to do
It wouldn't
that
be that
database.
difficult. I mean, it's just percentages and
Yeah,
build spawn points into the modules when you create the modular
Yep.
layout of the city, and then say it has this. It has like a 1% chance to spawn at this spawn point, 1% chance to spawn at this point, and then just make 100 of them. Done.
yeah. But like I'm saying, my sort of goal right here is to try and keep us from getting in this mindset where everything about the player has to be tied to this class system that we have now created.
Yeah, the class system is only there for the very, very beginning of the game. Only for
Very well
the
for the
the
beginning of the game and to an extent the way you progress, but everyone in some sense of the word is a victim of circumstance.
Yep.
And we have to account for that in some way. Otherwise, the beginning of everyone's game suddenly gets much, much too predictable. You will, or if you spawn in, some level of a hospital every time when the game says that you're a doctor, you're going to know where you or what you are and what your specializations and how you should have some idea of progressing every time just by where you start. So, and I don't sort of like that because it throws out the idea of randomness and every game is going to be different. If you give the player an immediate knowledge of, okay, well, you are X, you should do Y, just based upon where you start.
If it's percentage based though, then it wouldn't really be that much of a problem. If you would have to tweak it and you'd have to be really careful on how you do it. But like if you're a doctor, and it's only like a 10 to 15% chance that you're going to spawn at your place of work, which would be the hospital or like a local
Clinic or
doctor's
something, yeah.
office.
Yeah.
Then you wouldn't really know. And if you go back to just it chooses for you what you are, most often it's going to be there's so many variables that there's only going to be a few instances that you're actually going to right off the bat know exactly who you are, what you're good at, what your profession is. And that would be the times that you spawn at work, where you're lucky enough to spawn at work. And that might not even be that lucky, because you might spawn at work and your work might be surrounded by zombies right at
You
the
might have a
start.
horde right outside.
So
You might
there's so
spawn
many
in the
variables.
emergency room, but be a meth dealer.
Yeah.
Because you happen to be in the emergency room because some meth addict hit you in the butt with a nail board.
There you go. That'd be another thing.
Room when
Like
the zombie apocalypse break out, which
even if
would be
you
a horrible
spawn-
place to be, because hospitals and zombies. Oh lord.
Yeah, exactly.
No mercy.
But yeah, like you'd have to account for all of those type of things. Like every single profession that it would choose for you, it would give you different percentages on where you would spawn. And you could if you spawn in a hospital, you might just assume, oh, that means I'm a doctor, but that you might actually just be someone who was taken to the hospital.
Yep.
You could be the janitor.
And
That
you
too.
know, it would be a cool thing. Like you come up in one of these areas, and there might be some type of marking, or there could just even be like a little diary or something that kind of that says why you're there, in a reason. Like, you know, because in a situation like this, I mean, it could be there, could be not, because a lot of people, when they're trying to like, oh man, I need to make sure that people knew I was like here during this. Or in case, you know, somebody finds me, and this can go out to tell people that may know who I am, kind of like a less will and testament or something along those lines.
Well, I actually think it works better if you don't tell the player why they're there. So, you know, you spawn as a police officer, but you spawn in a brothel. And you're like, what's going on in this thread?
That makes
And then that
more
kind of
sense
gives you
than
the
anything.
freedom to make up your own story.
Yeah. So you're like, why was that a brothel? There's nothing here that tells me. I'm assuming I was either arresting someone or getting my groove on. Either I'm a great cop or I'm a bad cop.
Both. You could be doing both.
Arresting somebody while getting your groove on. All right.
Yep.
Kill two birds with one stone.
You see, she was the one that wanted to cooperate. You, on the other hand, get in the wagon.
It was
you
a
wake up in
sting
a brothel
operation.
handcuffed to a hooker, and you're like, all right. And she's a zombie, and then you're like, nope.
Wait, well, so just so we're all on the same page, this is where in the timeline is the game going to start?
I
like 2 weeks.
Yeah, let's say or a week and a half, or a week or 2 weeks. You know, whatever. Some period of time needs to have passed between when you start the game and
when society falls apart.
Yeah.
Not even so much when society falls apart. When you start the game, and like from when the zombie apocalypse start, and then when the city becomes wasteland.
Yeah.
I've used the example before, and it's an awful movie, but it's a pretty good example. It's the second Resident Evil movie. You start at whatever point that movie started at. The city's been basically abandoned except for the undead and like maybe a dozen people still alive, who plus whatever military response was sent in that are left over running through the streets shooting zombies. There's like maybe a dozen or 24 people left in the entire city, and everything else is dead. That's the point you need to start at.
And that makes absolute perfect sense, because the whole point of the game is to pretty much see 1 or 2 people, and that be your only fucking like contact with the world. That's the only thing that you'll know. And let's hope that they're friendly.
Yeah.
Let's pray to God that they're friendly. All right. Well, I think we definitely this has been a very, very interesting episode. I knew this one was going to be an interesting debate back and forth between all of our ideas. So the big question now becomes, where do we want to go for the next episode? Because I think we can branch into a few things with this.
At the risk of us getting too wrapped up in the class system. Or again, I do sort of think like fleshing out the, what skills and the way skills work and progress, like in a dedicated manner, might be a good idea for the next episode. But
Yeah.
I also threw out the idea for this episode, so if someone else wants to take the reins here so I don't seem like I'm domineering the discussion.
The way I see it, on the one hand, we could talk about skills next podcast, but at the same time, do we really need to? I mean, we've filled the podcast here with tons of ideas, and if
Yeah.
somebody does grab this game and start developing it, they're probably going to redo most of these ideas from scratch. But there's enough content here that they have an idea of where to start. Do
Yeah.
we really need to get into the nitty gritty of how the skill point system works?
Well, I'm not so much concerned about how the skill point works. I'm talking and the vision of our version of this game that we're kind of slowly working our way through. I think that would be a good idea not to just flesh out how the skills points work, but what skills are available in the version of the game that we want to see. Because I mean, while this is and we do want developers to know that this is an open source idea. Heaven forbid we should have said this in the beginning. And if you guys made it this hour and something way through this podcast, this is an open source idea. Grab it, run with it. We just want to play it, please.
And please give us credit, if it's convenient.
Yeah, or maybe a copy. That works.
Although, here's one thing to think about. If we're going to we would essentially be talking about, like, skills for 2 weeks in a row. Would that be, like, too much?
I think we don't have to do the entire podcast on it, but I think I think we need to talk about what we want to include in terms of skills. It's an important topic just because it dictates things like crafting, and it dictates things like available items that we'll be able to use, because there's no point in having a Stinger missile if we don't have anything for explosive weaponry or something along those lines.
Yeah,
Not
you
to
could
mention
lump it together.
Go ahead.
So just touch on skills, kind of just go into more detail, just split them up, I guess, would probably be the most important thing. Then talk about the type of weapons you would use, the type of items you would come across, just kind of the type of things that you would come across throughout the game.
Things like, do you find a crowbar, or do you find a level 3 crowbar of tiring?
Oh God, no!
I mean, but I mean, Dead Island uses a leveled weapon system like that. So I mean, do you have leveled weapons, or is it just a crowbar that does X amount of damage? Things like that need to be discussed.
Well, we will find out that next week. But for now,
tune in next week when we decide whether or not we have crowbars of murdering.
I hope everyone who is listening to this point enjoyed the podcast thus far. Be sure to leave comments in whatever medium you are hearing this in. We'd love to hear the type of feedback, and we do read this, and we do take the ideas that we have, or the ideas that are given, and we do kind of muddle them around in our head, this and that. And be on the lookout for the podcast coming on next week. But for now, this is Craz.
This is a level 16 crowbar of crowbarring.
This is Luni.
This is Ben.
And this is the Whale.
And we're signing out. I hope you guys have a great day, night, whenever you listen to this, and catch you next time.